From as far back as I can remember, my sister Lila has always been the golden child. She didn't just take up space in the family. She owned it. Everything revolved around her, from what we had for dinner to where we went on vacation. And me? I was Elijah, the invisible one, the brother who could never quite measure up. The favoritism was painfully obvious, even when we were kids. If Lila got a B on a test, my parents would shower her with praise. "Oh honey, you tried your best. We're so proud of you." If I brought home an A, the reaction was a shrug and a distracted "that's nice. Now go help with the dishes." It wasn't that they ignored me entirely, they just didn't seem to care. The imbalance wasn't limited to grades. Lila was the one they spent money on, the one they made time for. When she decided she wanted to take piano lessons, my parents bought her a brand new baby grand piano and hired the best teacher in town. They went to all her recitals, dressed up in their best clothes, and took her out for ice cream afterward, even if she messed up. When I told them I wanted to learn guitar, my dad dug out an old acoustic from the attic. It was missing 2 strings and had a giant crack down the side. "Here," he said, handing it to me like it was an afterthought. "You can teach yourself. That's how the greats do it anyway." I don't know why, but I held on to that guitar for years. I even tried to teach myself, but it was hard when no one seemed to care whether I succeeded or not. Lila, on the other hand, had their full attention. It was the same story with chores. If Lila left her dirty laundry all over the house, my mom would laugh it off. "She's just so busy with her studies," she'd say, as if that excused the piles of clothes everywhere. Meanwhile, if I so much as forgot to take out the trash one night, I'd get a 30-minute lecture about responsibility and being a team player. The car incident was the perfect example of how different we were treated. When Lila was 16, she crashed the family car into a mailbox because she was texting while driving. My dad brushed it off with a laugh. "Well, that's why we have insurance," he said, as if it wasn't a big deal. Lila cried and got a hug from my mom, and 2 weeks later, she was back behind the wheel like nothing had happened. When I broke a cheap vase in the living room, an accident that happened while I was cleaning, by the way, my mom went ballistic. "Do you have any idea how much that cost?" she yelled. I wanted to point out that the vase came from a thrift store, but I knew better than to argue. That's just how it was. Lila could do no wrong, and I could do no right. It wasn't just about how they treated us differently, it was the way they looked at her. My mom's eyes would light up whenever Lila walked into a room, like she was the most wonderful person in the world. My dad would brag about her to anyone who'd listen. "Lila's so talented," he'd say. "She's going places." They never said things like that about me. When I worked hard and achieved something, their reaction was lukewarm at best. When I graduated middle school with honors, my mom forgot to take a picture. When I made the honor roll in high school, my dad said, "Good job, kid," and then changed the subject to Lila's upcoming recital. At some point, I stopped trying to impress them. What was the point? No matter what I did, I'd never be as good as Lila in their eyes. By the time we were teenagers, Lila had mastered the art of being the center of attention. She was good at everything, or at least that's how my parents told it. She was smart, talented, funny, and beautiful. Meanwhile, I was just me. When it came time for college, my parents practically bent over backward to help Lila get into the school of her dreams. She wanted to go to a fancy private university out of state, and my dad pulled some strings with one of his fraternity buddies to make it happen. They paid for everything: tuition, room and board, even a brand new laptop. When I started thinking about college, I knew better than to ask for help. I ended up going to a local community college, working part-time to cover tuition and textbooks. My parents didn't seem to notice or care. That's how my entire childhood and teenage years went. Lila was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the background character in my own family. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it. And then, when I finally got engaged, everything came to a head. By the time I proposed to Natalie, I thought I'd finally moved past all the resentment I'd carried growing up. I'd built a decent life for myself. I had a steady job, a good group of friends, and, most importantly, someone who loved me for who I was. Natalie was everything my family wasn't. Supportive, kind, and genuinely interested in my happiness. When she said yes, I felt like I was finally getting my fresh start. I didn't expect much involvement from my parents or Lila when it came to the wedding. They'd always treated my milestones as footnotes compared to Lila's. So when Natalie and I started planning, we kept things simple. A small venue, close friends and family, nothing over the top. But, of course, Lila had to get involved. It started when I casually mentioned our plans during a family dinner. Lila immediately jumped in, acting like the idea of a small wedding was a personal insult. "You can't have some basic backyard wedding, Elijah," she said, waving her fork like she was delivering a TED Talk. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You deserve something grand, something memorable." Before I could even respond, my mom chimed in. "She's right, you know. Lila has such a good eye for these things. You should let her help." "Help with what?" I said, trying not to let my irritation show. "We've already got it under control." "Oh, please," Lila scoffed. "You're terrible at planning things. Remember your high school graduation party? It was so awkward. Let me handle this. I'll make sure your wedding is amazing." I glanced at Natalie, who was doing her best to stay polite. Later, she told me she didn't want to make waves and suggested we let Lila help in a limited way. "If it makes your parents happy and they're paying, we can compromise," she said. I should have said no. I should have stood my ground. But I didn't. Lila's idea of helping quickly turned into taking over. Within a week, she'd already booked a venue. Some over-the-top ballroom that looked like it belonged in a royal palace. She hired a wedding planner, picked out a catering service, and even started designing the invitations. All without consulting me or Natalie. When I pushed back, she rolled her eyes. "Relax, Elijah," she said. "I know what I'm doing. Trust me, you'll thank me later." My parents, of course, took her side. "Lila's just trying to make your day special," my mom said. "She's doing you a favor." I wanted to scream. How was this my wedding when I didn't even get a say? But every time I tried to set boundaries, my parents and Lila acted like I was being unreasonable. "You should be grateful," my dad said one evening when I told him I wasn't happy with how things were going. "Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? Lila's making sure you get the wedding you deserve." Grateful. That's what I was supposed to be. Grateful that my sister was hijacking the most important day of my life and turning it into a spectacle for herself. It wasn't just the big decisions she took over, it was the little ones, too. She picked out the flowers, the centerpieces, and even the colors for the bridal party. When Natalie mentioned she wanted to wear a simple dress, Lila scoffed. "You can't wear something plain," she said. "This is a wedding, not a PTA meeting. I know a designer who can make you something stunning." Natalie, bless her, tried to keep the peace. "It's fine," she said to me one night when I was venting. "It's just one day. As long as we're married by the end of it, that's what matters." But it wasn't fine. It wasn't fine at all. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about my entire life. Lila had spent years making everything about her, and now she was doing it again on the one day that was supposed to be about me and Natalie. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The wedding day arrived, and by then, it barely felt like it was my wedding anymore. Lila had orchestrated everything to the point where Natalie and I were basically guests at our own event. The venue was extravagant. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and a literal red carpet leading to the altar. It was the kind of wedding you'd expect from a celebrity, not two people who'd originally wanted a simple backyard ceremony. Lila, of course, was everywhere. She wasn't just in charge of coordinating things. She made sure everyone knew she was in charge. She strutted around in a designer dress that was almost as elaborate as Natalie's wedding gown, barking orders at the staff and directing guests like she owned the place. Lila, the photographer's asking about group shots. I heard one of the planners say, "Tell him to wait," Lila replied. "We're sticking to my timeline." Her timeline, not ours. Natalie was doing her best to stay calm, but I could tell she was overwhelmed. Every time we tried to sneak a moment alone, someone would come up to us with a question or a decision that had to be made. Questions and decisions that should have been handled by me and my wife but had somehow been passed off to Lila. But the breaking point didn't come until the reception. The reception was held in a grand ballroom that looked like something out of a fairy tale. There were twinkling lights, a live string quartet, and a 5-tier cake that probably cost more than my first car. It was beautiful, sure, but it wasn't us. It was Lila. I tried to push my frustration aside and focus on Natalie. After all, this day was supposed to be about us starting our life together. But as soon as we sat down at the head table, Lila was right there, inserting herself into the spotlight. She had somehow managed to seat herself right next to me and Natalie, even though we'd specifically asked for the bridal party and our parents to take those spots. When I glanced at the seating chart, I realized she'd changed it at the last minute. "I thought it made more sense this way," she said when I confronted her. "Don't be mad. It's just a little adjustment. A little adjustment." That was her excuse for everything. But the worst part came during the speeches. Lila had insisted on giving a toast, even though we'd never asked her to. She practically grabbed the microphone from the best man, launching into a long, rambling speech about how much she'd helped with the wedding. "I just wanted everything to be perfect for my baby brother," she said, flashing her trademark smile at the crowd. "It was a lot of work, but seeing how beautiful this day turned out, totally worth it." She went on, listing every little detail she'd organized, as if she were the bride herself. She barely even mentioned Natalie, except for a quick, "Welcome to the family," toward the end. By the time she sat down, I was gripping my glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Natalie leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay?" "No," I said, setting down my drink before I did something stupid. "But I will be." I wasn't going to let Lila steal this day from me. Not anymore. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my tone light, but there was an edge to my words. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today." I began. "It means the world to Natalie and me to have all of you here to celebrate with us. And a special thank you to Lila, who, as we all know, worked so hard to make this day what it is." There was polite applause, and Lila beamed, clearly thinking I was about to shower her with praise. "This wedding wouldn't have been possible without her," I continued. "In fact, I'd say she's had more influence on my life than anyone else here. She's taught me so many important lessons over the years. Lessons about patience, forgiveness, and, most importantly, how to stand up for myself." The applause tapered off as people began to sense the shift in my tone. Lila's smile faltered. "So, thank you, Lila," I said, raising my glass, "for reminding me that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to take control of your own story. Here's to new beginnings." There was an awkward silence, followed by a smattering of applause. Lila looked like she wanted to sink into the floor, but I wasn't done yet. As soon as the speeches were over, I pulled Lila aside. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "Good," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Because you embarrassed me in front of everyone by turning my wedding into a spectacle for yourself." She started to argue, but I held up a hand. "This was supposed to be about me and Natalie, not you, not Mom and Dad. And you ruined it." Lila's face went red. "I was just trying to help." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You were trying to make this about you, and I'm done letting you do that. Not just today, always." For once, Lila didn't have a comeback. She just stared at me, speechless, as I walked away. The rest of the night went surprisingly well. Once Lila was out of the spotlight, Natalie and I were able to actually enjoy ourselves. We danced, we laughed, and we spent time with the people who truly cared about us. As for Lila, she stayed at her table for most of the reception, sulking. A few people went over to check on her, but for the most part, she was ignored. For once, the spotlight wasn't on her, and I think that hurt her more than anything I could have said. After the reception, I thought things would settle down. Lila had been humiliated, sure, but I figured she'd eventually brush it off like she always did. That's what Lila was good at. Pretending nothing was her fault and carrying on as if the world revolved around her. But this time, she didn't just carry on. She fought back. It started the morning after the wedding. Natalie and I were on our way to the airport for our honeymoon when I got a call from my mom. I let it go to voicemail, but 5 minutes later, she called again. "Just answer it," Natalie said, glancing over at me. With a sigh, I picked up. "Elijah," my mom snapped, her voice already loaded with tension. "What the hell was that speech last night? What are you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew. "You humiliated your sister in front of everyone," she said. "Do you know how upset she is? She hasn't stopped crying since the reception." I rolled my eyes. Lila crying? Sure. Maybe she had shed a tear or two. But I knew her well enough to know this was all part of her act. "Mom, it was my wedding," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I wasn't going to let her hijack it. She was just trying to help." My mom insisted. "You had no right to say those things." "I had every right," I shot back. "This isn't about Lila. It's never been about Lila. For once in my life, it was supposed to be about me." My mom didn't like that answer. She launched into a tirade about how ungrateful I was, how much Lila had done for me, and how I'd ruined the family dynamic. I let her rant for a minute before cutting her off. "Look, Mom, I'm not going to argue with you about this," I said. "Natalie and I are on our honeymoon, and we don't need this drama. If Lila's upset, that's her problem. She brought it on herself." And with that, I hung up. The calls didn't stop there. Over the next few days, my phone was flooded with messages from my mom, my dad, and even some extended family members. Apparently, Lila had gone on a campaign to paint herself as the victim, telling anyone who would listen about how I'd attacked her during the wedding. She did everything for him. One of my aunts texted me, "And this is how he repays her?" I ignored most of the messages, but the sheer volume of them was overwhelming. Natalie tried to reassure me, saying, "They'll get over it eventually." But I wasn't so sure. Lila had a way of turning people against me, and this time it felt like she'd succeeded. When we got back from our honeymoon, the tension was still there. My parents invited us over for dinner, but it was clear from the moment we walked in that the night wasn't going to go smoothly. Lila was already there, sitting at the table with her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. "Hi, Lila," Natalie said, trying to be polite. Lila didn't respond. "All right," I said, sitting down across from her. "What's this about?" My mom sighed dramatically. "We just want to clear the air. This family has been through enough, and we can't keep fighting like this." "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm just setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" Lila scoffed. "You mean throwing me under the bus in front of all your friends and family? That's your idea of boundaries? You threw yourself under the bus," I shot back. "If you hadn't tried to take over my wedding, none of this would have happened." For a moment, Lila didn't say anything. Then she leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You're so selfish, Elijah. Mom and Dad raised us better than this, but you've always been jealous of me, haven't you? You couldn't handle me being better than you, so you had to ruin the one thing I was trying to do for you." "Better than me?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You mean better at making everything about yourself?" "Sure. Lila, you're amazing at that." "Stop it!" my mom yelled, slamming her hand on the table. "Both of you, stop it." The room went silent, but the damage was already done. That was the last time I tried to have a normal family dinner. After that night, I made it clear to my parents that I wasn't going to tolerate Lila's behavior anymore. "If she wants to apologize, I'm willing to listen," I said. "But until then, I'm done." "Don't be like that," my mom pleaded. "She's your sister. You'll regret cutting her out." "No, I won't," I said firmly. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Cutting ties with Lila and, by extension, most of my family wasn't an easy decision. Even though I was angry, no furious, with how they treated me and hijacked my wedding, there was still a part of me that wanted their approval, or at least their understanding. But after that disastrous family dinner, I realized they were never going to change. Lila would always be the golden child, and I would always be the one who was too sensitive, too bitter, and ungrateful. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. The weeks after the wedding were surprisingly peaceful. Natalie and I settled into married life, enjoying the quiet moments without constant interference from my family. For the first time, I felt like I could finally focus on my own happiness without worrying about living up to anyone's expectations. But, of course, Lila wasn't done yet. Started small. Passive-aggressive texts, cryptic posts on social media, things like, "Some people really show their true colors when they think they've won." She didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. A few mutual friends and extended family members even reached out to me, asking what had happened. "I heard you and Lila aren't speaking," my cousin Amber texted. "Is everything okay? She seems really upset." "She's upset because I finally stood up to her," I replied. Amber didn't respond, but I could tell she didn't know how to handle the situation. Lila had always been the golden girl in the family, the one everyone looked up to. For me to publicly call her out, especially at my wedding, was practically unthinkable. Then the rumors started. Apparently, Lila had decided that if she couldn't make me apologize, she'd destroy my reputation instead. She told anyone who would listen that I was jealous of her, that I'd always resented her success, and that my behavior at the wedding was proof of how bitter and insecure I was. She just wanted to help him. My mom told one of my uncles, who later relayed the conversation to me. Lila put so much effort into that wedding, and Elijah just threw it all in her face. It's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking? For her? The breaking point came about 3 months after the wedding. Natalie and I had finally started talking about buying a house when I got a call from my dad. At first, I thought he was reaching out to make peace, but I should have known better. "Elijah," he began, his tone already loaded with that patronizing disappointment I'd grown up with. "This thing with Lila has gone on long enough." "What thing?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. "This feud," he said. "She's your sister. She loves you. And it's killing her that you're shutting her out like this." I couldn't help but laugh. "It's killing her? Really? Is that what she told you?" My dad sighed heavily, like I was the unreasonable one. "I'm not taking sides, but I think you need to apologize to her." "Apologize for what?" I snapped. "For standing up to her? For not letting her take over my wedding? For finally setting boundaries? She was just trying to help," he said, echoing the same tired excuse I'd heard a million times before. "No, Dad," I said, my voice rising. "She wasn't trying to help. She was trying to make the whole day about her, like she always does. And the fact that you and Mom keep enabling her is why she's like this in the first place." "That's not fair," he said. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You've been making excuses for her my entire life, and I'm done with it. I'm done with her, and I'm done with you and Mom if you're going to keep defending her." I hung up before he could respond. After that, the floodgates opened. My mom called, leaving tearful voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart. Lila sent me a long email, alternating between guilt trips and insults. She accused me of being a bad brother, a toxic person, and my personal favorite, the real golden child. "You've always had it easier than me," she wrote. "Mom and Dad never put any pressure on you because they didn't expect anything from you. They knew you'd never achieve what I have." I didn't reply. What was the point? Lila wasn't interested in having an honest conversation. She just wanted to win. But the final straw came when she showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist called to tell me there was a family emergency. Concerned, I excused myself and went to the front desk, only to find Lila waiting for me. She was dressed to the nines, as if she were going to a gala instead of ambushing her brother at work. "We need to talk," she said, flashing her most charming smile, the one she used when she wanted something. "Lila, this isn't the time or place," I said, glancing around to see if any of my coworkers were watching. "Then when?" she snapped, her smile vanishing. "You won't answer my calls, you won't reply to my messages, and Mom and Dad say you won't even come home for the holidays. You're avoiding me." "Maybe because I don't want to talk to you," I said bluntly. She stared at me, stunned. I don't think anyone had ever spoken to her like that before. "I just want to fix things," she said after a moment. her voice softer now. We're family, Elijah. We shouldn't let this come between us. I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered the social media posts, the rumors, the way she tried to twist everything to make herself the victim. This isn't about fixing things, I said. This is about control. You can't stand the fact that I've finally stopped letting you walk all over me, and now you're trying to manipulate me into letting you back in. That's not true, she said, but her voice wavered. It is, I said. And you know it. For the first time, Lila didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, she turned and walked out. That was the last time I saw her. I wish I could say that cutting Lila out of my life was easy, but the truth is, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I missed her, I didn't, but because of the fallout. My parents were furious. My extended family was divided. And even some of my friends didn't understand why I couldn't just let it go. But Natalie understood. She supported me every step of the way, reminding me that it was okay to prioritize my own well-being. You don't owe them anything, she said one night as we sat on the couch, sipping wine and watching TV. You've spent your whole life putting up with their crap. It's time to live for yourself. And that's exactly what I did. It's been 2 years since the wedding, and I don't regret a thing. Natalie and I bought a house, started a family, and built a life that's completely ours. My parents still reach out occasionally, but I keep them at arm's length. Lila? She's a ghost from a past I've left behind. Sometimes, cutting toxic people out of your life is the only way to move forward. And while it's never easy, it's always worth it.